One thing certain is that almost all Somalis, including the students, are very happy with the work accomplished by the courts.
Mohammed, and where were you living? In Leicester. And how do you like it in comparison? Do you prefer it in Mogadishu?
No, I prefer it back in Leicester.
You prefer it back in Leicester.
As we continued our tour of Islamic-controlled Mogadishu, we came across a demonstration. It turned out the building was a bank, Al Barakat, and the demonstrators had lost their deposits when its assets were frozen by the Americans after 9/11.
maalinkaas noloshayda hadda sida hadda iga muuqatay maalinkaas ninka nolol fiican baan ahay boqolkiiba boqol haddana.
This man said that he did well when he was relying on a stipend from Barakat, as did thousands of others, including orphans and the poor. And he is here together with other disabled people to protest the decision of the United States government and to request a lifting of the ban.
Inside, we found more angry people.
It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against Somali people. Is it fair, the biggest nation, to take over the poorest nation? This is a contradiction against human rights, because millions of Somalis suffer because of that action.
In 2001, al-Barakat had been accused by the Americans of being one of Al-Qaeda's personal bankers. Since then, the 9/11 Commission has cleared it of terrorist links, but the assets are still frozen, and the bank's director, Ahmed Jamali, is still a marked man.
Are you still on a terrorism watch list?
Yes, despite the 9/11 Commission report and the investigation conducted by the FBI in 2002.
The US says that part of the war on terror is winning hearts and minds in the Muslim world. Do you think that the US has made some enemies in Somalia as a result of the losses at Barakat?
I personally was a friend of US. I was educated by the Peace Corps of the US, but after the freeze and listing of our names in that terror list, it added to the hatred, and it fueled the hatred of the US.
Despite all the positive things we'd seen in Mogadishu, the rebuilding, the new system of law and order, we also came across signs that some of the concerns about the Islamic courts were justified. We'd been told of foreign jihadis and secret camps. We were constantly warned that Shabab extremists might assassinate us because we were Christians.
We've been given this jihadi video. Many of them are locally produced, they're poor quality, and they're a call to arms and also a call for fundraising. Here you see images and the voice of Osama bin Laden describing Somalia as being in the front line of the global Al-Qaeda jihad. The West has accused the UIC of harbouring terrorists involved in acts around the region of Eastern Africa. Of course, it's impossible for us to establish whether that is true, but this video, apart from including the images of Osama bin Laden and other Al-Qaeda leaders, also celebrates some of the leaders of the UIC and their acts in this war against all of their rivals. We've been invited to interview Sheikh Hassan Dahir Awais, who is the most influential leader in the Islamic revolution taking place in Somalia. He's chairman of the Shura Council, and he's also the ideological leader for Shabab and the militant Islamic forces. It's alleged that you are harbouring 3 terrorists linked with the 1998 US embassy bombings in East Africa, and that members of the Islamic courts have been linked to murders of aid workers and other terrorist acts.
anigana waxay ugu daninayaan inaan dawlad islaam inaan dhiso rabo.
The Sheikh says that he knows that the United States doesn't want the Islamic courts to install an Islamic government in Somalia, and so they make up these allegations of terrorism links, for which he says they have no evidence. Do you think that you'll become more moderate? Or will you have more power to install the kinds of reforms that people say they feel might become like a Taliban-style government in Somalia?
haddii ay u jeedaan baalkii muxuu ahaa qonyar socodka ama modernismka haddii u jeedaan qaabka reer galbeed.
Awais says that they will pursue an Islamic system, but at the same time take what is good from the West in terms of moderation.
Not everything.
We heard that crowds were gathering at the airport to greet some very important guests. The Islamists have spread control across a swathe of Somalia, but despite trying to unify people under the banner of religion, clan rivalries still divide the Somalis. This has brought them to the brink of war with the internationally recognised government. Now, suddenly, members of that government had flown in. The Islamic courts were hoping they'd come to join them.
The Islamic courts are riding on a wave of popularity in Somalia today. Meanwhile, the government in Baidoa is collapsing in on itself. Here, the Speaker of Parliament is officially trying to save the peace talks, but some say that he's here to defect to the Islamic court side.
Sheikh Adal, the Islamic court's foreign secretary, was delighted to see them.
You're obviously quite excited. There were very euphoric scenes of like a reunion.
We are always excited for Somalis to come and join. The Islamic courts have pacified Mogadishu as well as the other areas under its authority. And we are appealing to all Somalis to come, to return regardless of their political position.
As it turned out, the speaker was only there to push a peace plan. Talks have all but broken down, and now war is looming between the forces in Mogadishu and the official government. And that's drawn neighbouring Ethiopia into the battle over the future of Somalia. The Ethiopians have massive troop numbers, aircraft and heavy weapons. They've declared war on the Islamic courts, who are now rallying support for jihad, or holy war.
It's quite an electrifying, wild atmosphere in Mogadishu at the moment. All the time there are groups going off to the front line. They're not armed with anything more than their devotion to Islam and a few machine guns.
Hatreds between Muslim Somalia and Christian-led Ethiopia go back centuries. A fresh clash of civilizations now threatens to engulf the Horn of Africa.
The Islamic court militias have had the power to mobilise Somalis in a very effective way because they can appeal to their sense of nationalism because Ethiopian soldiers are on Somali soil. And that, mixed together with the militant Islam that has restored law and order to Mogadishu, makes for a very potent mix.
Some of the fighters being thrown into the holy war are so elderly that they wouldn't look out of place on the set of Dad's army.
These are old veteran soldiers from a government that fell 16 years ago, and they're being thrown into the jihad again to help the Islamic court forces. You're an elderly man. Why are you in uniform going off to fight? This man says he put on his uniform to defend Somali nationalism. He was in the war against Ethiopia that took place in 1977, and he says that he's going back to fight against the Ethiopians to defend his people and his religion and his country.
We were taken up to the front line where the Islamic forces are squaring up to the government and the Ethiopian army. We were the first Western journalists allowed to travel up to this front. Many of the Islamic fighters, Shabab extremists, were angry to see us, Westerners, in their midst. But luckily, we were with Abu Mansour, a Shabab leader.
Yeah, that's right. That's your son, isn't it, Abu Mansour? He's a 12-year-old boy. What's he doing here?
Abu Mansour says that his two sons came to the front line for jihad, fulfilling a wish he had when they were born.
ولله الحمد عرها هدي لا غوغو أنا كان اسكو حكومينا تكبير
Abu Mansour says that they will achieve an Islamic state. They will be ruled by the Quran. And even if the Americans destroy the words of the printed Quran, they are imprinted on the hearts of the Muslims, such as his son Mansour. All of these are the young Shabab militias. We're right on the front line. This is an anti-aircraft gun. We're well within range of the Ethiopian-backed government forces. I've actually never seen Somali fighters so focused on what their objectives are. Back in Mogadishu, for the first time in their lives, these kids are enjoying peace. But that might be short-lived as war and famine loom again. Why? The West refuses to engage with the Islamists despite their control of the capital. It has sided with the Ethiopian-backed government instead. Already, fighting has broken out on the front lines. Today, in this post-9/11 world, there's an Islamic revolution taking place here in Mogadishu. It was the Islamic courts, not the Americans or the United Nations, that ended the anarchy and began to re-establish the economy. But now Somalia sits at a crossroads, and there are fears of a fresh, terrible regional conflict, and also of the more extreme elements in the Islamic courts wanting to export jihad.